safe from heresy.
Well, I have no rational explanation as to why I lost that file.
Yeah, I can also send it to you if need be. That, no, which since we didn't finish the unit, you'll probably want to see it.
Thank you.
I'll send you a version that is heresy proof. Okay. Hi, Rose.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. Roberto, Sylvia,
Hello.
again. Hiya. All right. So we have been dealing with the phenomenon of messianism and how that, as kind of an offshoot of the mystical impulse, how that affected different phenomena in Jewish history, how it affected different communities. Now we're into the Hasidic world, right? We looked last time at text number 10, and I'm going to pull up the piece here on my share screen. Yeah, this was the piece we looked at last time, that it says, you know, that every person, Adam, is an acronym of Adam, David, Messiah, right? And so it has all those elements, you know, within each of us, the Messiah is there, right? And the Messiah will possess the full stature of all Jewish souls, right? And then everyone, and you know, this is like the purpose of our existence, according to this Rabbi, every individual Jew must endeavor to enhance the aspect of the Messiah that is related to his soul, so that his entire stature is rectified and established. In other words, that's your purpose in life. That's what you do, and that leads to the era of the Messiah in which there will be an unending and general unity of souls. Bimheira v'yameinu. May it happen speedily and in our days. Okay? So now we come to this next text, which is a more limited view of the Messiah, a Messiah who has much less power, who, when we think of the Messiah, we think of somebody who's going to change the world, like immediately, right? That the Messiah has this, amazing power to transform everything, to bring about world peace, to bring all the Jews in the world back to Jerusalem. And this view is a little different, right? This view is from one of the early Rebbes, one of the Hasidic masters, Yaakov Yitzchak of Przusha, who was known as the Yid HaKadosh, the Yehudi HaKadosh, the Holy Jew. Right? And this is what he says. The difference between the tzaddikim, the righteous of any generation, and the Messiah is that every tzaddik spends each day in the service of God according to his level of attainment. On the morrow, he adds to the preceding day's achievement, and so it goes. Each day he adds a little more. With a tzaddik who is the Messiah, it is different. He too must add a little more from the preceding day's accomplishments. However, over the night, everything he had achieved is erased, taken from him, so that on the next day, he must start all over again from the very beginning.
Hey,
Okay? A strange view
I'm
of the
fine. I'm
Messiah.
kind of in.
Daniel, you need to, yeah, thank you for muting. Okay, so this Messiah represents the depth of the task before him, right? He has to work every single day on his own development to advance the process of redemption even a little bit. So he's, if you think of the Messiah, a great Messiah, this is a version of a little Messiah, right? A tiny Messiah, if you will, right? And it also served as a way of insulating the Hasidic rabbis from the debacle of Sabbateanism, right? Because when you have this kind of messianic impulse within Hasidism, they were always open to the charge of, promoting some kind of false Messiah. And he says, oh, this is a different kind of Messiah. This is not like the Messiah who's going to bring everybody from the four corners of the earth back to Jerusalem. The Yehudi, by the way, is a very interesting figure in the development of Judaism. Someone who, in general, takes a much more limited view of the powers of the Hasidic Rebbe, the Hasidic master. And so he plays a very interesting role in the history of Hasidism. And if we get to that piece of Jewish history this year, we'll come back to him. Right? Questions or comments up to here? Okay, so, and let's go on to one of the other Hasidic rabbis who was much more overtly messianic, and that was Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Rabbi Nachman, who the Bratslaver Hasidim never replaced him, never had another Rebbe after him. He was also the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, so he also had a pretty special role in the eyes of his followers. And this teaching, it doesn't say that the Bratslaver is the Messiah, but it does indicate a little bit of a sense that maybe. So let's take a look at what he says. Okay. So here is a report in one of the books written about Rabbi Nachman by his secretary, which quotes what he says. He says, there are 70 nations divided between the domains of Esau and Ishmael, and those are code words for Christendom and Islam. Each of these domains is composed of 35 kingdoms, and they will be conquered in the future by the two Messiahs, Messiah ben Yosef and Messiah ben David. And there is one tzaddik in whom these two Messiahs are combined. Okay, so that's fairly overt, right? And he said several other things there, more than have been printed. In other words, there's stuff that is too hot to share here. And at that point, the table broke because so many people were pressing him around him. And he became harsh. And he said, are there Gentiles sitting around my table? Are these then messianic times that Gentiles should approach the tzaddikim, as in all the nations shall flow to him? Okay, so there were two conceptions of the Messiah in traditional Judaism. The lesser Messiah was Messiah ben Joseph. Messiah ben Joseph is like this suffering figure who will come to announce the arrival of the real Messiah, the Messiah who is the son of David, the descendant of the house of David. And the Messiah ben Joseph will help prepare everybody for the coming of the real Messiah. Maybe he will lead people to Jerusalem. Now, there were Kabbalists before who were, they thought of themselves as the incarnations of this earlier, lesser Messiah, Messiah ben Joseph. But
So are we supposed to understand that this is the biblical Joseph and David?
no, that these are the ones, they're just terms. Joseph is certainly exalted in Jewish tradition, but the Messiah, the real Messiah, is going to come from the house of David. So there's this lesser Messiah who's going to get everybody ready for the real Messiah.
But that lesser Messiah is a descendant of Joseph
Or, maybe not literally a descendant of Joseph, but in spirit at least.
Okay.
Okay, doesn't make too much difference. Now, there have been many times when people predicted the coming of the Messiah or said, I'm going to be that lesser Messiah, and the real Messiah will come after me. And what they often said afterwards is, well, the generations were not worthy. Right? In other words, we weren't at the level where we needed to be in order for there to be the follow-up, the real Messiah. Right? This is one of those theological maneuvers that was very frequent in Jewish history, especially when it came to talking about the coming of the Messiah. Now, all the signs point to the coming of the Messiah, but it doesn't happen. And why doesn't it happen? Because the generation is not worthy of it. Right? This is what they say afterwards. Whenever they make a prediction, the Messiah is going to come in 1250, or in the year 2000, or the Hebrew year 6000, which that's coming up in a couple hundred years. And I guarantee you there will be Jews who will say, and there's a whole Kabbalistic piece about this that we don't need to go into, but when the year 6000 comes, that will be the beginning of a 1,000-year period to prepare us for the coming of the Messiah. And I guarantee you that they will use this same argument when the Messiah does not come at that point, meaning, well, we just weren't deserving of it. We weren't righteous enough. Because that's what they always say when the Messiah doesn't come, right? So, try to be righteous, but don't expect it to make, to fix everything, right? Even the founder of modern political Zionism, Theodor Herzl, was described by Rav Kook, who later became the chief rabbi of pre-state Palestine, as the Messiah ben Joseph. Right? He was the one who was preparing us for the time to come. In this text, the teaching of Rabbi Nachman, that the one tzaddik who combines the two messiahs, Rabbi Nachman is probably talking about himself. And the deleted part, where it says, several other things more than have been printed, that's probably his actual claim that he is supposed to be the Messiah. Okay? And he hopes that this time the generation will be deserving. Right? Now, you have to know that Rabbi Nachman was, a very depressed individual, and also had many physical ills, and was just amazingly prolific in his teachings despite these drawbacks. And he saw himself as the suffering tzaddik, whose pains contain within them the hope for redemption. Right? It's kind of sad that he dies very young. He's actually, I think, 37 years old when he dies, and he has quite an amazing record to his credit for someone so young, with all of his teachings, and even though he was not tremendously successful at building up Bratslaver Hasidism in his lifetime, he was, very much ignored and reviled by other Hasidim, and especially by other Rebbes, by other Hasidic masters. But he's never replaced, and Bratslaver Hasidim has really thrived in the last couple of generations, and many people have been attracted to his teachings. And if we have time this year, we'll come back to him as well. Comments or questions up to here? Yes, Lou.
Last week, or the session before that, 3 weeks ago, I don't remember which one it was, we talked about that in order for the Messiah to come, there needs to be harmony among the Sfirot, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, discussions about the Messiah coming have been when there's been very little harmony and threats to the Jewish people. Are they mutually exclusive philosophies?
They really are. They to put it very simply, there are two theories in Jewish tradition about when the Messiah will come. One is he will come, and it's almost always a he. Sorry. That's Jewish tradition for you. But one theory is the Messiah will come when things are so bad they cannot get any worse. And that's when God will send the Redeemer. The other theory is the Messiah will come when things are so good that they can't get any better. Shlomo Carlebach used to tell this teaching about one of the Hasidic Rebbes, and I think this was about the seer of Lublin, who was the Yehudi's teacher. And it says, that we really wanted to bring the Messiah in the time of the seer of Lublin. But it was so joyful in his court. It was so wonderful. We forgot to bring the Messiah. We were having such a great time. It was so wonderful that we forgot to bring the Messiah. That's the time of the seer of Lublin. Also a very important Hasidic figure.
Rabbi,
Yes, thank you.
does
Karen.
that maybe that meant the Messiah was there in their presence if life was so good and they didn't know it? But I wanted to ask you about Rabbi Nachman. Did he suffer from depression?
Yes.
Because I know I've read some of his writings and I thought so.
Yes. When we come to him, hopefully this year, we'll look at some of his text.
Mhm.
He's it's really remarkable how much he accomplished in his short life, particularly given the degree of depression he faced. Not too long before he died, he had a young son who died, I think like, like the age of 4.
Oh,
So, if he had messianic pretensions or desires that his son might be the Messiah, it was all very crushing.
but I think he
in many ways.
contributed. He contributed an awful lot just by writing and being open about
Absolutely.
his depression.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. He was really an amazing figure.
Uh-huh.
Okay, last text here, and this has to do with modern Zionism, and what that has led to, which is some speculation that the founding of the state of Israel could also be the beginning of the messianic redemption. So here in text number 13, we have a piece from Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who you should know is the son of the famous Rav Kook, the one I mentioned, who is the pre-state chief rabbi of Palestine. But Tzvi Yehuda Kook sort of took his father's philosophy and ran with it a little farther. And here is what he says. The true redemption, which is to be manifested in the complete resettlement in the land and the revival of Israel in it, is thus seen to be a continuation of renewed settlement in the land, accompanied by the ingathering of the captive exiles within its boundaries. Hence, when this state of ours is in full control, both internally and externally, then the fulfillment of this mitzvah of the inheritance can be truly revealed. The mitzvah, which is the basis and essence of all mitzvot, that by means of our role can accomplish the act of redemption. So you know that there are Christians, particularly in the evangelical world, who believe that there's going to be an apocalypse, right? And that right before the apocalypse, all the Jews will return to the land of Israel, right? And we have a counterpart to that in nationalist orthodoxy, which exists to some extent outside the land of Israel, but it's a major, major force within Israel today, this kind of nationalist orthodoxy, and Tzvi Yehuda Kook became one of the leaders of this camp. Prominent person within the settlement movement, right? Settling all of the land, including Judea and Samaria, the West Bank areas, right? So, building Jewish settlements is going to lead to the coming of the Messiah, because this is part of the ingathering of the exiles and resettlement of the land, and that's going to be the final stage before the Messiah. Right? They not only make this, messianic time possible, but they guarantee it. Right? And it has to happen before the Messiah can come. It's a prerequisite for the coming of the Messiah. It doesn't mean that the Messiah has already come. It means we have to do this before the Messiah can come. Yes, Daniel.
So the evangelical Christian idea that for the Messiah to come, all the Jews have to go back to their homeland. am I understand then that they're getting that idea almost exclusively from Jewish sources?
No, I don't think so. But the impulse comes from the same place, right? So, it, it, it's nourished by the same impulse, but they don't, but they don't, and even the Jews don't really derive it from particular text. It's more theoretical.
Well, when you say no text, I mean, you're referring to like Torah text, not like
Right.
what we just read. We just
Right.
read somebody saying that's what has to happen.
Yes, they don't derive, but he doesn't derive it. I mean,
Source
whatever
text.
Torah texts he would quote in the service of this idea, they are, they've all been interpreted differently, and they don't explicitly say that this will happen right before the coming of the Messiah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? Okay, so yeah, there are there were in the 19th and 20th centuries many Orthodox thinkers who said, you can't bring about the coming of the Messiah. You shouldn't even go to the land of Israel. Why? Because that's an attempt to force the coming of the Messiah. You can only go back when the Messiah brings you back. Right? That's now there's no waiting around, right? We're going to help make it happen by going back. There's this interesting thing. Now, I've talked about this doctrine before, the idea of intrinsic sanctity, that certain mitzvot or certain people have within them a certain holiness. That holiness is not just achieved by performing a mitzvah, but they are intrinsic to the person or the thing in this case being the land, right? For Maimonides, the philosopher, and for many strands in Jewish history, the holiness of the land of Israel consists in the fact that there are mitzvot that you can perform there that you can't perform anywhere else. But in the mystical tradition, the land of Israel is holy because it is holy. It just is. And it's going to always be holy, regardless of how you treat it, and whether or not you go there. Right? So this idea suggests that maybe what some of us would want to do would be to since the land has this holiness, we should populate it Jewishly, right? And make it the Jewish Holy Land that it was intended to be. Meaning that, therefore, we're going to kick out all the non-Jews, right? So that's kind of dangerous in political terms. But that's what some of the settlement community would like to do. Yes, Daniel.
On that thought, briefly, the Torah itself has vastly different borders for, quote, the land of Israel. At least
Yes.
one of them goes over into the middle of Iraq. Did these people have an agreed upon definition of what those borders should be when they speak of the Holy Land?
Yeah.
What are they talking
Whatever
about?
they are, They are not the ones of the land of Israel as it was founded in 1948. And for many of them, they are not the borders of 1967, and certainly not the borders of today. I don't know if there's
Are they bigger?
agreement.
Are they bigger
what?
Are they bigger borders?
Probably, yeah. But the main thing to understand is that the borders that are political borders have no theological significance. Okay? The borders of God's land are God's borders, whatever they are, however you define them.
Okay.
But they're not the borders.
Well, I'll think about that one for a while, because you can't really have a people settling a land and controlling it. I mean, that's the definition of a modern state with borders. So
I understand, but you're thinking in terms of political states, right? This is the Holy Land, right? And the holiness of the land is not defined by whatever committee hammers out the borders.
okay.
Right? God makes the borders, right? Forget about all, whatever human beings finally decide. Okay? Or whatever the United Nations decided. Totally insignificant. It's God who declares the borders. And that certainly is part and parcel of what the argument of the settlement community in Israel. Right? Whatever virtues it has, it becomes an annoyance to the rest of the Israelis who who understand that politics is reality. Okay. The idea of messianism takes a little bit of a different turn here, as it does in Hasidism. So as we head into modern times, we get kind of a different take on messianism. If we get to Chabad, which I hope we'll get to this year, you'll see it yet a different view of modern Jewish messianism. But we all know a little bit about that, right? Because we understand that there are a lot of people in Chabad who understand that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, even though he's dead, many of them understand him to be the Messiah. Okay, so that's coming down the road. All right. Questions or comments here? Yes, Lou.
So with regard to the land, and I think we can all pretty much agree that the land is holy because God gave it to us 3,000 plus years ago. But are there religious subsets that feel that God resides in Israel or Jerusalem, even though God can be everywhere? There's a line, and I don't know exactly where it's from, and I can't quote it specifically, but something like "a light shall come forth out of Zion." And is that because that's where God is, and that's where it's going to come from?
Yeah, and there are those who would take that a little bit farther and who would like to create the third temple, because that's where God lives.
Well,
that should be where God lives.
I wasn't going to go to the third temple, but that's okay.
Yeah, but that's the reality for many of them. In other words, that is so true that they are willing to, blow up the mosque on the Temple Mount, probably initiating World War III, and trying to reestablish that as God's home. which also for them would be a prerequisite of the time of the Messiah. Okay, Rose, unmute yourself, Rose. There you go.
What is the Messianic period going to bring to the people? Because here we have some people saying that the Messiah will come when things get really bad, and then others are saying that the Messiah will only come when things are good, and then they're going to continue. And then we have all this in between that they have reasons that it's not going to happen, and they're bringing up these reasons in advance of anything happening. So I'm not sure how this all goes together.
Yeah, well, it doesn't necessarily go together. I mean, those two camps are really mutually exclusive, right? But there is broad agreement among many people in both camps as to what the messianic time will be like, right? In other words, it will be a time of permanent peace, a time when the Jews will be restored to their land, right? A time of justice, right? You know, all the bad judges will be thrown out and replaced by me. Or, you know, whoever thinks like me, the writer of this text.
But is this going to be for everybody or just for the Jewish people?
Well, it's going to be for everybody, but one aspect of it will be, yes, the Jews will be shown to possess the highest truth.
Thank you.
The Jewish religion will be revealed to all as the true religion. And all those other religions, well, you'll see a great example of this in our next unit on prayer and ritual, especially in L'cha Dodi, right? That you have the Christians and the Muslims, you know, because those are the two camps that Jews live among. And they will both be shown to be subservient to Judaism in the Messianic era.
If everyone accepts Hashem as the one, I'm sorry, Rose, were you going to continue?
Thank you.
If everyone accepts the oneness of the Jewish God, isn't that kind of saying the same thing as that everybody's going to be Jewish?
Not necessarily. You know, we've always had this notion of Noachides, those who abide by the 7 mitzvot that were given to B'nai Noach, to all the children of Noah, meaning all the world that are not Jewish, right? So you don't have to become a Jew and take on all the Jewish responsibilities, you know, keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher and, you know, praying all the time, right? There's no sense that everybody else is required to do that. But everybody will look up to those Jews in this understanding. Okay? All right. Other comments or questions here before we move to the next unit? Okay. So now we go to the role of prayer and ritual in mystical Judaism. Now, you know, there are those of us who perform rituals and recite prayers for very different reasons from the mystics, right? Sometimes we do it because it's the Jewish thing. We just, you know, we do the Jewish thing, and therefore we either come to synagogue or we do these things, these rituals, wherever we are, because we're part of the Jewish people, and in one way or another, we believe this is what we should be doing. There are also people who have done these things because they want to have an intense sense of closeness with God. And they may not be able to describe that sense adequately, but they know they want it. And that's why they do these things, because these things are meant to bring us into that state of something approaching union with God. And we have an established liturgy, even though there, it's always been open to new rituals and new prayers. There are certain things that we do and that we say, rituals that we do and prayers that we say, and the mystics added in certain things and also reinterpreted the things that we were already doing in a Kabbalistic sense. Right? And the mainline Kabbalists who dominated Jewish thought for many centuries, they certainly intended for their prayers and their rituals to have an effect in the higher levels, in the realm of the Sfirot. Within Hasidism, they were meant to evoke a strong sense of devekut, of cleaving to God. Even though they also try to affect the higher realm. They try to affect God's need rather than, our own need of coming close to God. And they really have both of those goals in mind. The 19th century Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch said, the Catechism of the Jew consists of his calendar, meaning that the prayers that we say on weekdays, on Shabbat, and on festivals, and the rituals that we do day in and day out, and also on special occasions, they reflect the basic beliefs that we have followed for many generations. And so that leads us into seeing how the mystical tradition affected Jewish belief as well as Jewish ritual. So now we're going to take a very early example of this phenomenon. Right? This is a Hechalot text, which means probably comes about between the 2nd and the 8th century. Hechalot texts are just very difficult to date more precisely than that. But that's the basic age that we're talking about. Okay, so just take a look at this first sentence. Who is like the Lord our God? Who is like our master? Who is like our king? Who is like our creator? All right, what prayer do you know that evokes? Yes, Luke?
Ein Eloheinu.
That's exactly it. No, except this is the second verse. Mi Eloheinu, mi Chadonenu, mi Chamalkeinu, mi Chamoshienu. Right? So there it is, right there in the Hechalot text, right? Which continues, Ein Kadosh Kadonenu, Ein Keloheinu, Ein Tzur Keloheinu. There is no rock like our God. Okay? And Rabbi Ishmael said all these hymns and everything related to this matter, Rabbi Akiva heard when he descended to the Merkavah, the chariot, In other words, when he went in for mystical experiences, he comprehended and learned them before his glory. For the ministering angels of the Holy One, blessed be he, chanted them before him and blessed his glorious name and would exult for each blessing and praise. So, in the view of the author of this text, when Rabbi Akiba went in for mystical experience, which is attested to in the Talmud, it was for the purpose of hearing these songs of the angels so that he could learn them and he could pass them on, and then he could evoke the power within them and also evoke the sense of union with God that was associated with them. Okay, so you have the Hebrew of the initial lines, and if you think about Ein Keloheinu, it's very repetitive, and it's very rhythmic. And if you weren't singing it like the German beer hall song that we use for the tune, Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, but if you would do it much slower and much more rhythmically, Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kamalkeinu, Ein Kamoshienu, Mi Keloheinu, Mi Kadonenu, Mi Kamalkeinu, Mi Kamoshienu. There is a much different approach to the song, and the idea behind it may have been to induce a certain change of state, a little bit of a trance, moving the mystic along toward this state of union with the divine. Right? There are many other prayers that we have today that originated in the Hechalot literature. There's an early version of Aleinu in the Hechalot text. Right? It was introduced as a prayer that Rabbi Akiba offered when he witnessed the angels before God's throne. Right? So, Aleinu is really a prayer about the Jewish mission. Right? That this is who we are and what we're supposed to do. Lifnei Melech Malchei Amlachim, before the King of Kings. This is who we are. In fact, the last paragraph of Aleinu has been described as one of the best mission statements of Judaism. Of course, that sort of depends on what you think the mission of Judaism really is, but many people will go along with that, even among the mystics. Right? So the story of the 10 martyrs that we read in the Musaf service on Yom Kippur, right? That is largely taken from the Hechalot text. Right? It's clearly not historical. Right? So if any of you actually thought that the 10 martyrs were historical characters, the answer is yes, they were. But what happened that's described in those texts, for the most part, did not happen to those people. Rabbi Akiba, there's a much stronger, historical basis for the idea that he was martyred by the Romans. But the 10 martyrs as a whole, that probably did not happen. The Kedusha that we say every day is very important in Hechalot literature. The Hechalot mystics were, just kind of building on existing ritual, but they had some very specific intentions, because they, what's the core of the Kedusha? You have the line, Kadosh, 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 right? Where does that come from? Comes from the vision of Isaiah in chapter 6, right? The vision of Isaiah standing in the throne room of God, hearing the angels singing Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh before God. The second key line, Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkomo, that's taken from Ezekiel, in the vision of the chariot described in the first several chapters of Ezekiel, right? And that's where the line Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkomo comes from, right? And so they believed that when we recited the Kedusha, it was like we were finishing up the prayers of the angels. And that, by the way, is why there is a tradition that when we say the Kedusha, we say it standing with our feet together. Why? To evoke the angels, because they believed that the angels all stood on one foot. Right? So we imitate the angels by standing with our 2 feet together as if they were one. Right? And that too comes from the Hechalot tradition. So, the Kedusha is kind of a base for the Hechalot prayers and visions that are, part of this time. They're, slightly dumbed down for the average Jew. But if you read the Hechalot texts, they're much more intricate and much more in-depth experiences of God's presence. Okay? Questions or comments up to here? Yes, Lou.
I'm so disappointed to learn that the martyrology is not so historical.
Okay, well, then, you can just delete that from your memory bank, Lou.
Okay,
but it's okay with me.
But talking about Akiva in the Merkava and Pardes, those stories come after Akiva. Did he ever discuss any mystical experiences himself?
The only one that I can tell you for sure is the one that's contained in the Mishnah. And that's where Rabbi Akiva says, in preparing the others who are going on this journey, for the trip, he's kind of the guru on the trip. And what he says is, when you see the walls of water, that they look like water, don't be deceived, because they're not actually water. Okay? What that means, we could go into forever, but it's about one aspect of the mystical trip, and that there are illusions in the trip which are really designed to deceive the unworthy. And don't believe it. Don't be seduced into thinking that those illusions are real.
So that's something, though, that is attributed to him actually saying.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's in the Mishnah. You can't get much more authoritative than that.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments before we close? Okay. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next week. Be well, everyone. Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Rabbi.
All righty. Have a good week, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.